Welcome to Open Dialogue. With me in the studio today, I have Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos with us. Thank you for joining us, Marcus. And we have Syed Mohammed Razavi, as ever, giving his, if you like, expert opinion. Our topic in this segment is focused on our politics, the resistance politics in the West. Or more specifically, let's perhaps talk about Britain and the USA. What does resistance politics mean here? Do we need one? I mean, the reality of our state is that increasingly big business seems to dominate most of the show. Even workers in the West have significantly lost, if you like, the value of their money. The prices have gone up. Brexit's on the way. Donald Trump doesn't seem to want to do business with us too easily. We're leaving the EU. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of fear. There's plenty of demoralization potentially out there as well. What's going to happen to us in terms of what we're going to do? Jeremy Corbyn is arguably a man of resistance, if you like, politics. He's resisting arguably one force which has sneaked in to our system, neoconservatism, neocons, a term which even now most people, or most of the public, will never have heard of, won't know what it means. But we are going to start with a short video which will hopefully open up the background to neoconservatism and neocons and how it relates to, if you like, those people within our political system here in a way who are the counterpunch, who are fighting to, if you like, maintain the rights of individuals or the hard-fought civil liberties which Britain and perhaps Americans have grown accustomed to over the years.
With being the godfather of neoconservatism. The students of Strauss's philosophy would flock to Washington. They allied with Wall Street and the central bank and steadily increased their influence over the nation's policy. Today, many of Strauss's followers have retired from politics or have died. Some believe the age of the neocon has passed. But their values and methodology for ruling is more prevalent than ever. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the neoconservatives took the credit for its demise. However, they needed a replacement villain. They found one in Saddam Hussein, and then Bill Clinton. Staying true to Strauss's philosophy, powerful and inspiring myths need not be believed by the ruling class. Many neocons began working for the Democrats, using neoconservative methodologies to create powerful myths, demonizing Democratic Party foes. These sometimes are called neoliberals. Because the neocon core belief in not believing the inspiring myths that they propagate, it can be difficult to identify who is a neocon. However, it is possible to identify them based on three core establishment beliefs that are rooted in the inception of their philosophy. Number 1, they are military hawks. Number 2, they support the central bank and Wall Street. Number 3, they support the surveillance state down to the last one of them. Many of the original neocons joined the Republican Party to find a more hawkish home, and they have unwaveringly stood by a military policy that continually expands the zone of freedom, as they call it. The neocons unconditionally support the Federal Reserve, the privately owned central bank that prints our money, and the large banks on Wall Street that control much of our economy. Their core belief that negative liberty or personal freedoms causes chaos fits in perfectly with the idea of a surveillance state. They distrust the masses, that the destructive force of individualism be curtailed by a surveillance state fits their ideology like a glove. Some only refer to the students of Strauss and Kristol as the neocons. Others, only those ideologues operating within the Republican Party. However, it should be correct to call any adherent of Strauss's methodology of social control as a neocon. They are the conservative establishment of both political parties within the U.S. This has been Epimetheus, and hopefully you can now identify a neocon. I believe this is an incredibly important topic. If you believe so too, share this video with your family and friends. If you would like to see the content I make in the future, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when I do.
Well, that's an interesting, if you like, introduction, very brief. Obviously, there's much more history there about what neocons are, but it outlined quite well some of their values and some of their, if you like, directions. Sounds a bit scary to me, sounds a little bit like control from the top, which is something I'm going to naturally rebel against. Your calls are vital. We've now opened the call lines. You've heard us talk about the resistance in Yemen, the resistance in Syria, and now we're obviously entering into a discussion which brings us to our own capitals here in the West. Are we under attack? Are our liberties being challenged through this ever-increasing control, often whispered in the corridors of power by neoconservative think tanks, influencing Theresa May, influencing the likes of perhaps Donald Trump as well? Marcus, your role is really in Parliament, in the British Parliament. You're very active and are there observing things. Do you feel that British politics has shifted to the right without people really fully, if you like, appreciating that that may have been done by neocon ideas, perhaps?
I don't think necessarily that's the case. When we talk about neoconservatives, we have to talk about neoliberals as well. The British Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords, is comprised overwhelmingly of neocons and neoliberals.
Right.
Now, they do have different opinions when it comes to domestic politics. That's very, very evident. But when it comes to foreign policy, they are on the same page as each other. They both believe in Western, or more specifically, American global dominance. So we cannot just talk about neocons, we have to talk about neoliberals. Now, where do they come from? Well, conservatives and liberals in Britain and also in America, following the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe, and in particular following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, saw an opportunity to achieve something they had been fighting for nearly 50 years with communism, which was world domination. And of course, they achieved that. And we must always remember, in terms of foreign policy, the first victim of the neocons and the neoliberals was Yugoslavia. They dismembered Yugoslavia. They destroyed that country. Why? Because they did not want a socialist-run economy, a country in the new Europe, and a country which did have ties to Russia. And the first people, the first victims of the neocons and the neoliberals were the Serbs. The Serbs were demonized in Croatia, in Bosnia, and then over Kosovo. And of course today, if we have a look in the British Parliament, it is comprised of people who have no moral compunction in voting for invasions or bombing campaigns. And it is so bizarre how the British mainstream media, the liberal side and the conservative side, they talk about anti-war MPs. Well, if you're going to talk about anti-war MPs, that means, by the very logic, there have to be pro-war MPs. And I can assure you from now, there are many, many pro-war MPs in the House of Commons. Just look at them when it comes to invading other countries, the bombing of Libya, getting involved in Syria.
Well, it's an excellent start. We've got, I believe we've got on Skype a link with Brother Musa Pidcock. Welcome, Musa, welcome to the show.
Yes, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Good to see you and good to hear you. We're talking about the makeup of British politics today. You formed the Islamic Party of Britain many moons ago, in a way, in the aftermath of the Satanic Verses saga back in the 90s. But actually, you've more latterly been working with other political movements, like the New Chartists, for instance, New Constitutionalists, or I think that's what they were called, or perhaps even UK Column. There are lots of Middle Englanders who are also actually quite unhappy with neoliberalism and neoconservatism and what it's up to, not just from the political, if you like, perspective abroad in terms of their belligerent foreign policies, but also in terms of the economy. Can you give us a little take on your thoughts on that?
Well, we formed the Islamic Party in 1989 in basically a response to the Salman rescue issue. satanic verses. So this was to lend a voice to say we should engage in the political game, basically, rather than burning books. You should engage and defeat the enemy, with a better argument. So this was the beginning of our campaign, which of course deals very much with the financial business. The battle, of course, has been in this country for the past 300 odd years. As we had the glorious revolution of 1688, not far from where I'm living, we have Revolution House, where the Duke of Devonshire and the Duke of Leeds met and conspired to bring William of Orange to set up the banking. And so this is the beginning of the problem for this country. So debt of 1.2 billion is 1.2 million 300 odd years ago. It's now running at 1.7, 1.4 trillion in interest charges. So the problem is that indebtedness and usury. And unless we address those, there is no possible defeat anywhere.
Well, thank you for that opening salvo. Maulana, usury, from an Islamic point of view, obviously we, politically or economically, are against usury. But arguably where Musa's coming from is that we live effectively in a world which is totally strangled by usury. But the political system, totally of course supported by virtually all sides, won't even raise this issue of usury and the economics, if you like, of usury, which is basically, according to Musa, will be the poorer remain poor and the elite remain elite.
Yeah, this is one of the dilemmas and problems of our world, that it is so much entangled with this kind of economical system that whoever comes up with another solution to it is very quickly undermined, because they are the ones who are going to lose the benefit. But we should not give up, as Brother Pitcock is saying, and what Islam has given solutions for this. And there are many non-Muslims as well who agree to an alternative system which can untangle us from the present economical situation.
Well, it's interesting. Musa, coming back to you, it's interesting how Middle Englanders are, if you like, talking about getting rid of usury. I mean, I know the UK column fraternity, for instance, are very strong on this. Critical thinking and Clive Menzies and his team have been working on this. They're all, lovely, middle of the road English people who've recognized that there's a fundamental problem. And it's interesting how Islam, which is actually probably the most vilified ideology, or Muslims in Britain now or in the West, arguably are the pariahs. It's interesting how they have, if you like, a natural connection with these kind of Middle Englanders who are objecting to the injustice of ordinary people. It's a fascinating reality, but it's something which most Muslims, I would argue, are sleepwalking through. They're not interested in this usury question themselves, although their religion totally bans it. And of course, the mainstream British fraternity are probably oblivious to it as well, and none of the political parties will certainly touch it. How do you broach such a massive issue?
Well, let me come to the point. I reverted to Islam once I realized that we have courts of law, not courts of justice. And having attended now several hundred cases, people being defrauded by the banking system through the imposition of the court, I came to a conclusion there had to be a better way. So it's common sense, and what we were brought up with. I was brought up Roman Catholic, and the same value apply to Islam, but the one book that they haven't managed to altar is the Quran, which is why it is basically feared. The Muslims, of course, are not helping because they are very much involved in the Sood or the usury system. So, and people recognize hypocrisy and they don't like it. But it's not a new thing now. If you look at this, and you look at the, for instance, statements by Jefferson, by Madison, all of them, the good president opposed usury, and of course several of them were assassinated, including Lincoln and Kennedy. So the issue is, the primary issue is we must fight the real enemy, but we're diverted to blame on else. Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Musa. I'm going to bring Marcus in. Some very revolutionary talk here. I mean, you're a man who works in Parliament where the political economic future or fate of this country is decided. Today we're going through Brexit, which is the biggest issue on the agenda. But you know, arguably things like Brexit or politicians tinkering around with some of the budgets that we see, and perhaps, you know, what we see on the surface in terms of our economic prosperity, never talk about the potential root cause of the entire problem that Musa's raised here, that actually moneylenders are in the background who possibly dictate both what Theresa does and what Donald Trump does. That actually none of these politicians or our political system can get out of the grip of moneylenders, effectively the usurious interest-based system which keeps this country in debt, which keeps America in debt, and yet we're all sort of quietly, if you like, you know, just acquiescing to that. It doesn't get raised.
Well, do you know, I don't disagree with everything that capitalism stands for. I do think that it does have some positive elements, but the capitalism in the world today, in the West today, is very different to the capitalism,
sure,
say in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Capitalism as we know it today is more accurately defined as corporate capitalism. But the problem is this, is that capitalism, corporate capitalism, it touches upon something that is innate in many human beings, perhaps most human beings, and it is this, that people, generally speaking, will put themselves first. They are attracted to money, they are attracted to materialism. I don't mean to be offensive to any religion, but most Christians are like that, and I'm sorry, most Muslims are like that as well. So that is the greatest strength of capitalism or corporate capitalism. How do you challenge that when it is innate in human beings? I don't know. I think you can only try and limit it. You can only try and reform it here and there, like what Jeremy Corbyn is aiming to do. For example, renationalising the trains, renationalising water. That is a good start. Reform can be made, but ultimately no one should be under an illusion that you're going to get rid of this system. One of the reasons it triumphed over communism is that people are drawn to money. They do put themselves before community, before religion. And it is a great shame that communism and the religions of the world, Christianity and Islam, weren't able to work together, because fundamentally speaking, they say the same thing.
So this is a failure of people of religion. I'll let you come back, Musa. Do come back, and I'll let Maulana come after that.
Jeremy Corbyn has reneged on his agreement, which would solve all the problems. Now, this is an early day motion, EDM 748, which he signed 2013, agreeing to reintroduce the Bradbury pound, which is treasury money. When the Bank of England was declared bankrupt in 1914, the Treasury Secretary, Bradbury, issued 500 million treasury notes. Now, Austin Mitchell organized this EDM, and Corbyn and Macron agreed that they would, as soon as they got into office, they would introduce treasury money. Therefore, if you want £500 million pounds per day for the NHS, the Treasury issues it debt-free into circulation. Then you retire through taxation. End of problem. And therefore, you can solve the problem overnight. So, Corbyn and both have reneged now on it. And unfortunately, we had the meeting set, and somebody flew from America, Ellen Brown, from the Public Banking Institute. They called the meeting off 5 minutes in London. So they've obviously expected there's a solution. Lincoln solved the problem, but as soon as you solve the problem, the enemy has to get rid of it. Jesus walked on water, feeds the 5,000. Everybody's applauding. He's booked for every bar mitzvah. As soon as he touches money changers, they want to put him on the cross. The key is you must take back sovereignty over money.
Well,
and I have here, I'm going to say here, the 1878 policy, the bankers, how they will control the world. And before we go, hopefully, about 5 paragraphs.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, it's not something we're going to resolve here, but I raise it because people of faith, Maulana, from a Muslim point of view, it's something that I guess we really ought to be concerned about, because if we are saying that we want a better world and we also want a better end beyond this life, which Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, everybody believes in one form or another, it seems like we have to address this issue. Yet, within the secular political Western environment, we're probably further away from being allowed to really participate in politics from a religious perspective than ever before, given that the Muslims have probably been used as the primary tool to disengage even further. The Enlightenment, obviously people would argue Christianity was distanced from politics, and it would probably be a nightmare for secularists to imagine that religion might have a role in politics. But we've got bishops in the House of Lords, we've got the Queen, who still essentially is the head of Church of England as well, and is part of the political infrastructure. It's wrong to say that Britain has no links between religion and politics. And now Muslims who are political, who don't say basically that religion is separate from politics, are on the scene. Do you think this is also one reason why there's a discomfort with Muslims and Islam having a political voice in this country? Because the population is growing, the number of Muslims is rising, they have beliefs which are very strong, old school beliefs around abortion, around, if you like, usury, at least on paper. Do you think that's part of the problem now in terms of ourselves having a political voice?
Yes, of course, it is part of the problem. We have to look, especially the Muslim scholars, have to re-look at the whole solutions, the solutions that they have at their hands. The problem with Muslims was that during 1,400 years of after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they hardly had any opportunity to show the world what they have to present themselves, and they ended up either playing in the hands of socialism or capitalism, and they were never able to present what. Only one period of time that Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam presented some system, but he was killed within a short period of
so
time.
You're arguing that even Muslim empires like the Ottomans, the Ayyubids, even though they had in Baghdad, the Abbasids, through that entire period, they didn't present really a proper Islamic, if you like, economic,
they couldn't
political
completely present it.
Not in a complete way.
Now, some Muslim countries are trying to present the system, but they still there are weaknesses. Like Iran is trying to present, but they have come up with solutions, but still it's not a complete solution.
Marcus, I get it that the system isn't going to change overnight. The British people aren't going to be revolutionary overnight, and Jeremy Corbyn is probably the closest you've got to trying to begin the reform, if you like, of hyper-capitalism, if you like. But this interests me, this area of religion and politics. And Musa runs the Islamic Party of Britain. There are Christian political parties. They're not banned. and yet the actual formulas or objections or the critique of those systems is probably not known to most of the public. In your dealing in Parliament, is there a space for faith to have a voice within politics? Yeah.
Well, you already said that in the House of Lords there are bishops there, and they certainly do talk about curing society's problems, problems in British society, using Christian values, and that should be applauded. You know, Britain is historically and predominantly a Christian country, and we should be very proud of that. But the problem goes back to what I said a few moments ago. People, no matter their religion, their ethnicity, their gender, think in terms of themselves first and foremost, and how much can they gain and how quickly can they gain it. You know, if we have a look at the church as an institution, whatever, the Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox church, they're run as businesses. Don't tell me that they live the life of Jesus Christ. You know, the teachings of Jesus Christ, you know, are the most wonderful, the most beautiful in the history of mankind. You know, if the world could be more like those teachings, then it would be a better place. And I mean, I can't, I'm not an expert on this, but I suspect that if the church as an institution is run as a business, maybe many mosques, they're run as a business as well, contrary to what the Quran says.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we have this in our society, and because we don't have a proper system to confront with it, unfortunately, it goes unnoticed.
Well, Musa, last word will go to you before we end this segment of our program. What would you say is necessary for us to do to at least get set foot on the road of reforming hyper-capitalism or hyper-materialism?
Well, the thing is that there's a lust for certainty with people. It is often called greed. But because there is a scarcity value of capital, the usurers or the rentiers have taken control. Now, this book is about Malaysia,
Currency
how
crisis.
it defeated the IMF, and we took the 5-point plan. Malaysia and Mahathir made fools of the IMF and saved this country. That you can do it, and we've already proven that. When Erbakan was, we had the plan for issuing debt-free money for Turkey. We had a call from the minister the next morning to say 17 generals had arrived at the ministry to say, if you implement debt-free money, there will be a coup d'etat in the morning. Because the power is for the usurer, Pitbull Shaitan, they control. Imam Ali said, if it for a man I would kill. So, got to kill poverty and the cause of it.
Well, thank you very much, Musa. You're very consistent with that message. And today we've had Marcus's kind of very interesting riposte and whatever, and Maulana's contributed well. Join us after this short interval again for our final segment for tonight.